by the witness stand. And this lady I had, she's tiny, but her husband had filed a petition and was called to the stand. The judge asked him to state his name, and the lady started yelling, screaming, and threatening her husband, and kept doing that. So finally, the judge decided that he was going to enter an order. She asked if she was going to be taken to the hospital, and judge said yes. She said, "Well, I'm going to sue you." The judge said, "You can do that." And then she said, "Judge, suing you is too good for you. I'm going to kick your ass." She took 3 steps to the witness chair, jumped over the bench after the judge, and landed on him, and was proceeding to attempt to beat him up. Luckily, there were police officers in the courtroom, and they were able to, it took 4 police officers to subdue her. And one of the police officers is trying to get his handcuffs out of his holder to restrain her, and the handcuff caught on his pocket. So as he's yanking, he's pulling his pants up, and he can't get it out. So that was the scene that we had there, and never seen one before, never seen one since. I would point out that shortly thereafter, a court officer was hired for the probate court. And for those of you that know John Contesti, he was the first court officer, if you can believe that. He was so tiny and small, but that was that one. The other story I had is we showed up in court when they had prosecutors, and no prosecutor showed up, and they couldn't find a prosecutor. So the attorneys that were there asked the judge if we could act as prosecutors and try the case. And the judge said, "Yes, you can do that, providing the petitioners agree." So we asked the petitioners if they wanted to wait for a prosecutor to show up when they didn't know when, or whether they wanted us to try the case. Needless to say, they all wanted us to try the case. So those are my 2 little stories that I had from probate court.
Who's us? Who's the other person?
Well, the other people, the other attorneys. So back to you, Dave. You're up.
Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate it. Unfortunately for Wayne, he's got some kibitzers in his room, but appreciate this story.
It's only Pollock.
Yeah, really. It seems every time we do something, Pollock's there with who's ever talking, so he gets around. All right. Next is a gentleman who literally is a giant among us because he's taller than all of us by a long stretch. Keith Cermak's been helping us out on the Macomb County Probate Bar Association for a lot of years, and he's been around in a lot of courts. And so, Keith, take it away.
This story also takes place when I was a young attorney. I had a very important motion up on a case that could go either way. And unfortunately, whatever the trial judge ruled, because it was such a close question of law and fact, the appellate courts would uphold it. Well, back in the day, whenever the offensive lineman for the Big Ten looked rather petite, I would go on a diet. So on my way into court, I had to stop at the medical weight loss clinic and weigh in. It turned out I had lost 50 pounds. I was really feeling great about myself. I got into court and the motion went better than I ever anticipated. I really felt good. I felt like I was a lean, mean fighting machine. After the motion was over, the court took it under advisement and he called me to the side of the bench. Judge looks down at me and he says, "Keith, you look terrible. Do you have cancer?" I left the courtroom really crestfallen. I had built myself up and I was torn down. I got into the hallway and the other attorney approached me thinking something improper occurred. And he said, "What did the judge say?" And I told him, "The judge asked me if I was dying." And the attorney said, "I'll never forget this." He said, "Well, I don't know if you're dying, but your case sure is." And that's my story, one I will never forget. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Keith. Just as an aside, when I sent out the information to the speakers on this, one of your fellow presenters sent me a text saying, "Oh no, Keith passed away 2 years ago. You can't use him for this panel today." I'll leave them unnamed for now. All right, next up is the guy who I blame for me being in this. Just as Doug Wozniak blames me for being a lawyer, Bill Monahan's the reason I am in probate, because he and I shared an office together, and he dragged me into this and got me doing probate litigation. So it's all Bill's fault. With that being said, he's a wonderful storyteller and a wonderful man. Bill, stage is yours.
Well, thanks, Dave. When Dave called me to give a story, he told me I'd be talking to a large group, mainly of attorneys, but they'd be mostly muted. In fact, all of them would be muted, and I'd be the only one talking. So I said, that sounds like a dream come true. So I agreed. And my story has to do with a safety deposit box. About 6 years ago, a client came in and said that he was afraid his uncle, somebody had taken all of his money, and he had a lot of money. And I said, well, how much money did he have? He says, I don't know. I know it's a lot. And I said, well, let's back the truck up a little bit. How do you know he has the money? Did you see a bank statement or an investment sheet? No, he said, about a year and a half ago, my uncle was in the hospital, and he called me and he said, would you go to my house in a condo in the closet and get a suitcase and take it to your house for safekeeping? There's money in it, and I think it'll be safer at your house. So he said, I went over and got the suitcase, went back to my house, and I opened it, and it was full of money. I said, well, how much money was in there? Well, I don't know. I said, you didn't count it? He said, no. Did you ask your wife? Maybe she would want to count it. And she said, no, we didn't count it because it wasn't our money. So we closed the suitcase and put it in the attic. And a week later, my uncle got out of the hospital. He said, take the suitcase back to the condo and put it on the shelf. So he does. And then another year goes by. The uncle goes back in the hospital. And so like before, he tells his nephew, go over and get the suitcase. So he goes over and the suitcase isn't there. He looks through the condo, can't find the suitcase. Goes back to the uncle, who's being visited by an elderly lady who turns out to be a neighbor of his, and says, Uncle, your suitcase isn't on the shelf. And she said, don't worry about that. I have the money. I took the suitcase and I have it at my house. So that kind of upset him, but the uncle seemed to be okay with it. And he said, we've got to get that money back. He didn't know how much it was. So I said, we got to get a guardian and conservator appointed. We filed. I became guardian and conservator, confronted the lady, and I said, what did you do with the money? And she said, oh, I put it in the bank. I said, oh, that's very good. What bank? PNC. And did you put it in a bank account? No, I put it in a safety deposit box. Just happened to be joint with her and the uncle. He didn't know anything about it. I don't want his money. I don't care about his money. I just want it to be safe. I said, okay, let's go to the bank right away. And she said, well, do we have to go today? Because I got to get down to the casino with my friends. And I said, no, we got to go now. And then in the afternoon, you can go to the casino. We went to the bank, and the bank went and opened the safety deposit box. Finally, she said that she didn't want the money. She didn't care about it, but she had to call her attorney twice to make sure it was okay to turn it over. And he finally said, you better turn it over. They opened it up. It was a big safety deposit box, one of the biggest I've ever seen, about the size of a suitcase. And it was full of money. 5s, 10s, 20s, 1s, hardly any 50s. And that's why I figured he never counted it, because there were so many. They got 3 tellers. That's when the banks had tellers working, coming out, and they had 2 money counters. And an hour and a half later, they counted up the money, and every time they got 100,000, they would put it in a big plastic bag and write 100,000 on it. And 4 bags and a half later, they finally completed the count. It took them 2 hours. There was $427,000 that they had put in the safety deposit box. We put it right in the bank, But I always wondered what would have happened if he had died. Where would that suitcase have ended up? I know where the safety deposit box money would have ended up with the joint tenant, but that's one of my stories.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. All right. I have twice had the pleasure of having a case with our next speaker, Wojciechowski, who is a wonderful man and has many amusing tales. And he saved up one for us today. He was just there a minute ago. Hang on. Oh, he's up at the top. There he is. So without much further ado, Wally, the stage is yours.
He's just got on.
You got to unmute yourself, Wally. Wally, you got to unmute yourself. Try now. You got it? There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, now we're on.
All right. Bill had a nice lady. My lady is not nice. This is the bad, really bad, awful client. And I know people have had it. If somewhere along the way I lose my train of thought, it's because I got a COVID vaccine shot yesterday. So if I start slurring my words, it's because, not because I'm senile, it's because it is a side effect. So this really, really bad lady comes into my office, and she appears to be a very nice elderly woman. So she brings an interpreter with her and some paperwork. The interpreter is talking to her, and apparently she's getting sued by her stepchildren. And back then, I did not have a 2-year-old granddaughter, so I had not seen Cinderella or Tangled. If anyone has seen those, they have evil stepmothers in those stories. So this is the evil stepmother story. So lo and behold, I represent her, and we get involved in a 3-week trial, jury trial. And it's before Judge Marlinga, who I think was a fabulous judge. Things started out fine, but her story starts falling apart quickly. She tells me that she sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Ukraine to buy a house for her and her now deceased husband. She even shows me photographs of this alleged house. She then tells me that these properties were transferred in Michigan by her husband to her, but that falls apart because they were forgeries. So we're going through the trial, and one story after another falls apart. It's just getting worse and worse. She's then called as an adverse witness by the other attorney. The attorney starts asking her questions, and the interpreter is giving the answers and questions. About 10 minutes after that happened, she starts yelling and screaming in English at the attorney. Obviously, she couldn't understand everything that he said. And obviously, she was lying about most things. So my story even gets worse. The judge calls a break and sends the jury out and has the attorneys come up to the bench. And he tells me, he says, "Wally, your client is the biggest liar and crook I've ever seen." That's not a big shock to me at this point in time, and I tend to agree with him. However, it gets worse because it was a slow week for the Macomb Daily. They happened to be in the courtroom and heard the judge saying that my client was a crook and liar. So the next day, I get up, and it's in the front page of the Macomb Daily with my name on it that I'm representing a crook and a liar. So it gets worse because we obviously lose the case. I don't get paid. She flees the country to the Ukraine. So the moral of the story is that Disney stories do come true. There are evil stepmoms. That's it.
Excellent, Wally. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right. All right, next up is the general himself. I've had the pleasure of having a number of cases, being on the same side, the opposite side, and in between with Mr. MacArthur. So John MacArthur has very willingly agreed to share a story with us. So John, the stage is yours.
Very good. Thank you, David. And I particularly enjoyed David's admonishment that we should pick a non-distracting background. So that's what I kind of went for with mine. So hopefully it's not too distracting, but it's kind of the only one I have. But my story goes back, I don't know, 25 or 26 years with Judge Nowicki on a case. And a lot of us have had cases where it wasn't the stocks and bonds that people were fighting about or the real estate, but personal property. And this is a story of an item in personal property that was dealt with. It actually was the subject of an entirely afternoon hearing that we were doing. And it has to do with an antique rocking chair. And there were three people. I represented one of the co-owners of the chair, so to speak. And the person that was the personal representative in charge of doling out the personal property pursuant to the will. And this was an item that they could not agree on. Everybody lawyered up, and there were 3 attorneys having a rocking chair hearing trial in the afternoon with Judge Nowicki. And he finally called us back into chambers and said, you know, it was one of the more absurd wastes of time that he had and basically gave us sort of his disposition on what he was going to rule, and wanted to see if he could come to some sort of a settlement of it. It wound up being that he said if I could cut the chair into 3 pieces, he would do it, but he said that's not fair to the chair. So he came out and awarded joint custody of the rocking chair, because this was a chair from which Christmas presents were doled out for several generations. It was where the Easter Bunny sat, and it was very important to all 3 children. So they each got it 4 months of the year with alternating Christmases and Easters on a set schedule. And the last time I was in court on it was about 10 years after the order. The court retained jurisdiction over the chair, and we were had to go back in to decide how the refinishing project would go and just what type of method would be used. And Orville Formby was the guy that actually won the bid on the refinishing of the chair. But what they've done with it since, I'm not sure, because I lost track of it almost 20 years ago. But I thought Judge Nowicki's comments were outstanding, and so my story has to do with the dismemberment of the rocking chair and putting it in neutral locations, because the 3 children never spoke to each other again, to my knowledge. And for a while, the chair was being dropped off at our office in the lobby to be picked up by the other child on the same day so that they wouldn't have to see each other. But tales from the personal property disputes, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. All right, our next speaker, I go back the longest way with. Many moons ago, I started teaching business law over the college, and this next gentleman was already teaching it way before me. And we taught back to back, and we would cover each other's classes so many times. And I've learned a lot from this gentleman, and he always has a story to tell. Without any further ado, Mr. Henry Sachs.
Thank you, David. Probate law can certainly be quite interesting at times. Like most of you, I have prepared a few hundred wills in my lifetime for a variety of clients. But out of all of them, the one I remember most is a little old lady, a friend of my mother's from church, who had no children. She split her estate amongst the people and organizations she considered to be the most important to her. So I prepared the will, and she was happy. Little did I realize at that time that she would call me to change her will every time she got a new paperboy or mailman. She came to my office every 6 months to change her will and became my most frequent client. I also had another little old lady, the mother of a friend from high school who I did estate planning for. When it came time to decide which option to check on her healthcare power of attorney, she chose maximum treatment, even though she was well into her 80s. When I asked her why, she calmly stated, "Henry, I trust you, but I don't trust any of my 10 children." After meeting the children, I knew she had made the right decision. I've also had my share of contested actions. Funny thing happened during one of them when a witness was being sworn in. You see, the witness had broken his right arm and had it in a sling. When the judge said, "Raise your right hand," the witness stated that he couldn't. So the judge said, "Well, then raise your right leg." I've also had my share of probate assignments. One day I was assigned as counsel for a hearing on petition for commitment. Judge Harrison was presiding. I was at the hospital, Old St. Joe's East. The proposed ward wasn't sure if she wanted to attend the video hearing, but finally did. She appeared and sat down. When Judge Harrison appeared on the video monitor, the ward simply said, "She's not a god," and then walked out. I said, "Your Honor, it appears my client has nothing further." Now I'd like to share a few war stories outside of probate in light of the fact that this presentation is being recorded for posterity, and even the retired judges that are still living, still visit the bench and sit. I will have to keep them clean. Anyway, a few years back, I had a status conference in front of one of our favorite judges, the Honorable Mary Charnowski. As you know, despite her many quirks, she did start on time. So at 8 a.m., there I was, the first of 6 attorneys on this particular case. I walked into her office and couldn't help but notice all her Lions memorabilia. And as many of you know, she adorned the field for a while as a Lions mascot. I thought I should comment on the Lions in the hopes of getting on her good side. I mentioned to her that the Lions were playing the Vikings that weekend and that I had taken the Lions with points. She looked at me from her coffee mug and said, "You're gonna lose." My question, was she talking about the Lions or my case? Another tale comes from the district court trenches, specifically the 72nd District Court in Marine City, Judge Cummings presiding. My client and I were in the courtroom awaiting sentencing on my client's impaired driving. The first case called was a sentencing on a 22-year-old male for drunk driving. His attorney was making an impassioned argument when the judge abruptly stopped him and said, "Counselor, your client hit a building, 21 days. We were up next, and my client was shaking after what he had just witnessed. I asked the judge to deviate from the screening report and waive any probation or AA since this was my client's first offense. He had 0 points on his record and basically a low blood alcohol level when he was stopped. The judge said, "Counselor, I agree. And most importantly, your client didn't hit a building." My last story comes from a criminal pretrial. One morning I arrived early in hoping to get in and get out. The female prosecutor was wearing quite a bit of jewelry. I was hoping for a deal somewhat out of the norm, so I honestly commented on her exquisite jewelry and asked her if by chance, did she or her husband purchase any of it in the island of St. Thomas? My wife and I are avid cruisers and have purchased many items there. The prosecutor's eyes widened and she smiled and said, "Yes, I've purchased a number of items from St. Thomas." I then asked her if she knew that the jewelers believed it was good luck to give a good deal for the first sale of the day. She said, yes, she did. I then said, "Well, I'm your first deal of the day." She smiled and gave me the deal. Stay safe. Sacks out.
Thank you, Henry. All right. So next up is the gentleman who got stuck playing golf with me. We have annually a golf competition called the Prider Cup. You've probably heard mention of it. It's a competition between Macomb Probate Bar and the Wayne Probate Bar. And it's actually a competitive situation. We're using handicaps and we play in all sorts of formats. And it's a lot of fun. A lot of us play. A lot of people want to play. And we get great participation over the years. Unfortunately, for Cecil St. Pierre one year, they partner up with me and I was in the middle of what's called a swing change, which is a fancy way of saying you suck. And I was just horrible. And Cecil was, as usual, a very good golfer, playing very well, and very positive throughout. And I kept apologizing. He just kept telling me it's going to be fine. And I finally realized the best thing I could do was just get his putter for him and just get out of the way. That being said, he's also told a number of stories while out there and knew that this was somebody that we wanted to share a story with. So with no further ado, the stage is yours.
You see him?
Oh, where'd he go?
He was here.
You know, I gave this big buildup. Where'd he go now? He was here. Cecil, are you here?
I think he was having difficulty because he went to the secretary. Maybe we should.
Yeah. Maybe we'll pass on Cecil right now. Oh, well. We'll hold off on him.
Okay.
Our next one doesn't need any introduction, do you, Pat? Because we've seen her many times here, and she is the professor. But a lot of you have learned from her. Speaking of golf, though, I have a Pat story, and it's a short one, okay? She has the most beautiful swing I have ever seen. It is like a clock, and the clock arm goes all the way up and comes all the way back down. It is gorgeous, and I don't. And so I just love watching this golf swing of hers. She knows everything there is to know about the law, and she passes it along with a smile. Pat Patterson is yours.
Thank you. Well, what I'm going to talk about are a couple of mental health hearings out of Wayne County Probate, and this was a lot of years ago. At that time, the probate hearings were not done by video conference. We had to visit the respondents at the hospital, and the hospitals would bring them downtown to the courthouse for their hearing. So I got assigned one time, this was at Holy Cross Hospital, gentleman in his mid-80s, and he had been living in a nursing home, but the nursing home sent him to the hospital for treatment because in his form of dementia, he was acting out inappropriately in a sexual manner. First, he was trying to crawl into bed with the little old ladies, and he was constantly masturbating, no matter where he was. And I thought, this one's going to be fun. So I get to the hospital, and sure enough, he's sitting in a chair outside the nursing station with a nurse right next to him, one-on-one, and she's every 15 seconds, take your hand away from there. Don't touch that. Stop that. On and on and on. So obviously, he was confused. We were going to have our hearing. We get to the hearing, and this was before the former Judge Martin Maher. And this gentleman is sitting next to me, which also made me a little bit nervous. And the doctor got up and testified about, what the hospital related, and that his activities were continuing while he was in the hospital. So then it's our turn, and I asked him, I said, do you want to testify? And he goes, yeah. Oh no. So he jumps up and he runs up to the witness chair right next to the judge. And I'm now really nervous. So after I get his name, I say, all right, did you hear the testimony of the doctor just now? He goes, yep. And I said, is there any part of that testimony you disagree with? Nope. I have no further questions, Your Honor. So he gets his 90-day combined order. He's back at the hospital. A week later, I have hearings again at the same hospital. So I go to Holy Cross and I see the doctor who had testified. And she said, you remember so-and-so from last week? I said, yeah, how is he doing? She said, well, he's back at the nursing home. We've got him cured. And I was astonished. I said, oh my God, how did you do that? What happened? She said, we figured out if you put his pants on backwards, he couldn't find it and he forgot about it. The other story I had, another gentleman, when I visited him at the hospital, he was a constant mumbler. You couldn't understand a word he'd say. It was, and it was constant again. So we get to our hearing, and we have a visiting judge, and a retired female judge who is very, very experienced in probate matters, very kind. And so throughout the hearing, while the doctor's trying to testify, my client is mumbling and talking very loudly. And I'm trying to get him to quiet down, and the judge would turn to him and say, sir, I know you have something to tell me, but I'm going to have to ask you to wait your turn. Let me get the doctor out. We finally finished with the doctor. And before I can ask if he wants to say anything, the judge turns to my client. She said, "Sir, I know there was something you wanted to tell me. What is that?" And clear as a bell, he said, "I want to marry Vanna White." So I said, "Your Honor, I rest. That's not a sign of mental illness." Didn't matter. She put him back in the hospital. And then one other quick mental health story. A lot of you know Donald Gillen when he was a former assistant prosecutor. And there was one time apparently when he did mental health hearings. And he had one woman who sat at the table who was absolutely catatonic. She was staring straight ahead. She didn't look at anybody. She barely blinked. And about halfway through the presentation, she slowly stood up and she just looked at the judge and she pointed at Mr. Gillen. She said, "Your Honor, that is the father of my child." So mental health can be fun. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Pat. That was great. All right. My able assistant is not here right now, so just got to bear with me. Cecil, though I gave him a great introduction, evidently had to be pulled away for something. So we are lucky Paul McNamara is waiting. He's still waiting for us. And he's got a shirt on, so I'm really happy about this because he's in Florida right now. But Mr. Pollock is going to jump in and tell us a story before we wrap up. But I've got to figure out how to bring him in. To which those of us with technological advantage, and this is not my computer, say, "Sarah, where are you?" Excuse me, that's Sarah. Yeah. Sarah? Can you put them on? Yeah. Oh. Why is there two Megan Ashens?
Because she signed in two places.
Okay.
Megan, can you hear us?
Yep, we are good.
Okay.
Here's Alan.
Can you hear us?
Take it. Oh, well, do you want an introduction, Alan?
No, I don't need that. Anyway, since we're
the
going,
SOB is going to tell us a story. Go, Alan.
we're going back to the days when we can remember something. So back in the 70s, I worked for Legal Aid. I was appointed to represent a lady at St. Mary's Nursing Home. And why was that? Because she filed a petition to get rid of her daughter as guardian because she wanted out of that place. And somehow I snagged a psychiatrist that volunteered to testify on our behalf. And we spent a whole afternoon trying the case with Judge Spire. Most of the time was spent with the other attorney trying to tear down the testimony of the psychiatrist. How the hell I got him for free, I don't know. But anyway, after he got done, the daughter was out the door and so was my client. She got out of St. Mary's the same day, I think. Walked out the door because the judge removed the guardian and said, "You don't need a guardian, you're fine." The other one is, I don't know if you guys remember Judge Montgomery. He was a little different. So one time, this is when he was circuit court. He was the one who isn't he the one who used to bang on his computer on the desk all the time? Made a racket. Anyway, we're in chambers, and he was into genealogy. And he started talking about his family genealogy. I think he even has some kind of a book written on it, his, genealogy, his family history. But all while he's talking to us, I noticed that his crotch had ripped open. And I was staring at his underwear while he's talking about his family genealogy. It was very strange. So that's my two recollections from back in the day when I can remember what I did.
You're the only guy I
Anybody hear
can think of that would tell that last story, Alan. You're the only one I can think of. Thank you. All right. So our last one is coming to us from Florida. So Paul McNamara, most of you know. One of the first cases I ever had in probate is when I met Paul. This is when the court was going through building change. They were doing something building they'd moved. And so not knowing much about probate, Paul then took me around and introduced me to every single person in the court. The judge, the clerks, everybody in there. And I thought to myself, I think I'm in trouble here. He knows everybody and I know nobody. But it wasn't a problem because Paul is a gentleman and we got everything worked out. So, and Paul's wearing a shirt from Florida, and so I'm very happy. That was the only thing I really worried about today. So Paul, what I need you to do now is hit the unmute on your computer. All right?
Just did.
You did. So Paul, the stage is yours, sir.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Can you talk a little bit closer or louder?
Okay, I'm looking at Keith Cermak, and I'm thinking I'm even older than Keith Cermak, so he's the only one that's going to know possibly the judges that I'm going to talk about. When I started practicing law in 1968, I ended up in the probate court with Judge Parent, who happened to be the father-in-law of another pretty well-known attorney at that time, which was Richard Johnson, who's since passed. He passed at the age of 56. His father was Ivan Johnson, who was the prosecuting attorney here in Michigan for many, many years and did a lot of other political work. Those names Keith might remember, but the other people I'm looking at, probably Pat Patterson, she'd never remember. She's the youngest one that's I'm gonna try to make her remember something. So anyhow, Judge Don Parent was Dick's father-in-law. I was in probate court. At that time, there were only two judges, he and Judge Castellucci, and I was in his court. And because of the fact that it was a mental day, there were a whole bunch of chairs on the right-hand side of the courtroom that were empty. The mental people were sitting out in the audience area. So the attorneys would go sit up there. Well, this one lady came in and her husband was trying to file the petition to have her committed. That's how far back it was, because we had mental houses then. In any event, the story that he presented was that she was just she'd have rages and she'd throw dishes around and break windows and that type of thing. And of course, when the sheriff's department got there, there were windows broken, there were dishes all over the place. And here's this lady, she's sitting there. She looked like a very nice lady, maybe in her 60s. And she kept saying, "Judge, I'd like to talk." He says, "Oh, you'll have time, you'll have time." So everybody gets done. And of course, the judge finally says, "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" She says, "Yes. This is the fourth year in a row. I want to explain something, Judge. He threw the plates, he broke the windows, then he called the police." And the judge says, "What would be the purpose of that?" She said, "He wants to go fishing for 3 months in a row." It was so believable. The judge did not accept it, but it was very believable. I still think that lady did not throw the dishes. In any event, I mentioned Judge Castellucci, by the way, and Keith, just nod your head if you remember him. Okay, and Judge Castellucci, this is one of the nicest things that I can say about a judge. His aura, he did the adoptions. And if you ever were in there on an adoption day, it was unbelievable. He spent the whole morning with these kids, and there could be anywhere from 2 to 5 to maybe 15. But he was most gracious. It was like being an ultra grandfather with all these kids. And some of these things that we don't remember do come back every once in a while. And most of you don't remember Francis Castellucci, but he was a great guy, and did the juvenile and he did the adoptions and that sort of thing. And if you sat there for a couple hours, you'd be crying after a while because of the fact of how well he treated the kids. Then there's another one another story. I don't know how much time I have, but there's another story of a problem that I was asked by Judge Nowicki to see if I could solve it. It wasn't exactly an appointment. Well, I guess it was an appointment, but it wasn't like a specific mediation or something like that. He says, Paul, I got a difficult case here. Would you mind sitting in with them and seeing if you can do anything with it? I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. A gentleman and his wife, his somewhat recent wife, second, lived in Michigan. His two children lived in Canada, Toronto, as a matter of fact. An action had been brought by the two children to, essentially, they were saying that the new wife was having everything put into her name and reducing the amount that they're going to get in case of dad's inheritance. Dad was not competent. There was no question about that. However, he did attend the meeting and he was able to get some input. So what happened, the attorney for the plaintiffs was Paul Sawyer. I don't know if any of you remember him or not. His dad, Whitney Sawyer, was a standout probate attorney. But what happened, Paul Sawyer, when we got all done, we settled the case. And when we got all done, there was a lot of money involved. It was about $3 million. And the father said, bottom line, I'll give the kids $1.4 million, and everybody settled. The thing that Paul said was, I need to put a statement in the settlement, in the order. And the statement in the order was that the attorney's fees would be paid by the original fee agreement. Nobody knew what that was, but nobody cared because it didn't seem to be a problem. Well, then a year later, come to find out, there was another action brought by the kids in Canada, and they were suing Paul because his fee was 1/3 of 1.4 million. The case wasn't 6 months old. It never had much in the way of depositions, certainly didn't go to trial, didn't have very few court hearings, and he got $440,000 at that time after all the expenses. Bottom line is, it disbarred him. It came back to court, and it was determined to be I can't think of the word, but an ultra illegal fee. So he got disbarred, and he's never been back to practice since. So those types of things happened all along. Just one other story. I had another appointment from Nowicki. There was a gentleman in Cottage Hospital. The hospital brought a case, basically, because the man wouldn't eat. He was, I believe, 85 or 86, in his mid 80s. And he says, I don't want to eat. I don't want to live. I know I'm going to die. So Cottage Hospital brings an action in the Wicki's court. I get appointed to represent the individual. Went down and saw him. He was a gentleman. He'd been a truck driver. He had fallen down the stairs. He's not going to live for whatever purpose, whatever reasons that was. But he had a granddaughter who was about 30, 31, 32, and quite good looking, buxom to say the least. And I worked with this granddaughter very quickly because, the man may die. Well, what happened, the TV people got a hold of it, Channel 7. And the day of the hearing, we went through the hearing in the morning, and the day of the hearing, Channel 7, of course, is in the courtroom taking pictures of everybody. And the judge gave us his decision that the man could refuse to eat and be allowed to do what he wanted to do. And the lady, I stand up, and the lady is 31, 32. And I can understand, I just married my wife. And she jumps up and she grabs me and she wouldn't let go, and she's kissing me on TV. She wasn't watching when I got home, by the way. Thank God. That was the only thing I was worried about. She was watching Channel 7 News, and I'd be in deep, deep trouble. So anyhow, thanks to everybody. And this is a neat idea, Dave. Really working well. Take care, Keith.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
So long,
Great
Wally.
stories. And
So
that'll
long,
wrap up
Pat.
our stories for today. We're sorry we couldn't get to Cecil because he had to pull away. And for some reason, obviously, Judge Berlinga wasn't able to join us. He was excited about this. He's the first one that responded back. He wanted to participate. So if you like this format and enjoyed this, let us know. If you would like to do this, if we do this again, if you'd like to share a story, let us know that as well. We'd be happy to do this again sometime. We have been recording this. We told everybody we're going to record it. And we will probably make it available at some point in the near future. We had to figure out how we're going to do it. We'll let you know in an email at some point. With that, we're wrapping up. I think we're just pretty good on time today. And remind you that a week from today, we're having lunch with Bob again. And again, once again, we will discuss whatever you need to discuss about what's going on over at probate court. That'll be February 12th at noon. With that, have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.